Defining the curriculum. Here's an example from a recent couples workshop to show how the behavior change request dialogue works. To begin the demonstration, I asked a volunteer to state a significant gripe about his or her partner. Melanie, an attractive woman wearing a bright print dress, raised her hand. She shared what at first appeared to be a superficial complaint about her husband, Stuart. Stuart has a terrible memory, she said. It seems to be getting worse. I'm always nagging at him about his memory. I wish he would take a memory course. Stuart, a mustached, scholarly-looking man, was sitting next to her, and as if on cue, promptly began to defend himself in a weary tone of voice. Melanie, he said, I'm a lawyer. I have to remember thousands of pages of legal briefs. I have an excellent memory. Before Melanie had a chance to restate her criticism, I asked her what bothered her most about Stuart's inability to remember. When did it make her the most upset? She thought for a moment. I guess when he forgets to do something that I've asked him to do. Like last week when he forgot that we had a date to go out to lunch. Another thing that upset me was when we were at a party a few days ago and he forgot to introduce me to his friends. I stood there feeling like a complete idiot. I then prompted her by giving her the beginning of a sentence. And when he did that, I felt I was trying to help her pinpoint the deeper feelings, such as sadness, anger, or fear, that might underlie her frustrations. Basically, I was helping her identify the desire that was hidden in her criticism, a process I had described earlier in the workshop. But first, it was important that she identify her most frequent feeling, and then identify the fear behind that feeling. Well, she said, when he does those things, I feel unloved. I feel he doesn't care for me. I feel rejected. Then I gave her another sentence stem and asked her to fill in the blank so that she could make the connection of this chronic feeling to her childhood. And when I feel that, it reminds me of... Melanie filled in the blank with, it reminds me of my father, who was never there for me. He was always so preoccupied with other things, and he often forgot to attend my sporting events. I gave her a third sentence stem. And what scares me about that is... She replied, I am afraid he doesn't love me, that I am not important to him. I turned to Stuart and asked him to restate Melanie's frustration and mirror everything she had said so far, to give what I call a summary mirror. With a little coaching, Stuart finally said, if I got it all, your frustration is that I have a poor memory, and I forget what you ask me to do, and also ignore you at parties, and this reminds you of your dad's constant preoccupation, which made you feel unloved, and you were afraid that he did not love you. Did I get it all? With tears in her eyes and astonishment that he remembered everything so well, Melanie said, yes. I asked Stuart if he would validate Melanie's experience and express empathy by imagining the feelings she had as a child. While this was difficult for him, and he needed some prompting, he finally said, I get it. Given the fact that your father was often preoccupied and forgot about your school events, it makes sense that when I forget things you ask me to do, that it would remind you of your father's forgetfulness. And it also makes sense that you would be hurt and feel that you were not loved. I get that now. And then he showed his empathy, spontaneously. And I can imagine that you feel angry when I forget things. Is that the feeling? She confirmed his validation with some sobbing, saying that this was the first time ever that she had felt heard, felt important to him. Next, I asked Melanie to state what she wanted that would remove her frustration and the fear and hurt behind it. I asked her to put it in global terms, using words like always and never. In the unconscious mind, our wishes have no boundaries. We want everything all the time. I have learned that it is important for people to state this global wish, even though they realize they will not get it. It helps them focus on the childhood wish embedded in the frustration. After she came that far, I knew I would ask her to break it up into manageable, bite-sized behaviors. What I want most, Melanie started saying, is to know that I am important to you all the time, that you are always thinking of me, and that I am more important than your work, always. At first, Stuart's face softened with this request, but then he looked overwhelmed. Now, Melanie, I continued, I want you to write down a list of specific behaviors that would help you feel more cared for, important, and loved. Will you give Stuart some concrete information about how he could become a more positive force in your life? She said she would. Next, I gave Melanie and Stuart and the rest of the group some detailed instructions. I explained that their partners would ask for behaviors that could be difficult for them to enact because they had not been allowed in childhood. Understandably, they would feel some resistance. Some might feel that it was impossible to respond. But I continued, if you stretch and give your partner what they need from you, it will activate that part of you that was shut down in childhood, and you will develop hidden parts of yourself. Your partner's needs are an invitation and opportunity for you to grow. I then sent the workshop participants back to their rooms, having asked them to identify a chronic complaint, isolate the desire that was at the heart of the complaint, connect it with a childhood experience, and come up with a list of concrete, doable behaviors that would help satisfy the unmet desire. They should then look at each other's lists and rank the behaviors according to how hard they would be to act upon. I told them that sharing this information did not obligate them to meet each other's needs, but that the purpose of the exercise was to educate each other and to develop their capacity for empathy. If their partners then made the decision to stretch into new behaviors, they would now possess some specific guidelines. Any suggestion of obligation or expectation on my part would reduce the exercise to a bargain, bringing with it the likelihood that the whole experience would end in resentment and failure. When the group reconvened, Melanie volunteered to share her list. She had followed the SMART Behaviors Guideline and made her requests small, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-limited. Here are a few of them. For the next 4 weeks, I would like you to set aside one night a week so that we could go out for the evening. And during that evening, I want you to tell me 3 times that you love me. I would like you to introduce me to your friends when I meet you at the office for lunch next Thursday. And for the next 3 months, each time I come to your office, I would like you to introduce me to another friend. I would like you to give me a special present on my next birthday that you have bought and wrapped yourself. And during my birthday, I want you to look me in the eye 3 times for 1 minute each and say, "You are the most important person in my life." For the next 3 weeks, I would like you to call me on the phone once a day just to chat. For the next 2 months, when we go out to dinner, I would like you to remember to pull my chair out for me and then lean over and kiss me. For the next 2 months, I would like you to reduce your hours at the office so that you don't have to work on Saturdays and Sundays. For the next 4 weeks, I would like you to call me if you're going to be more than 15 minutes late coming home for dinner. For the next 3 months, I would like you to give up your separate bedroom so that we can sleep together every night. According to my instructions, Stuart had reviewed Melanie's requests, ranked them according to difficulty, and chosen a request that he could honor with relative ease. In fact, he announced to the group that he would begin the exercise that very evening by remembering to pull Melanie's chair out at dinner. There was a marked contrast between his earlier antagonistic response to Melanie's complaint about his poor memory and his cheerful response to these specific requests. Because he understood that these behaviors addressed one of Melanie's unmet childhood needs, because he was allowed to rank them according to difficulty, and because he was free to choose whether to do any of them or not, he found it relatively easy to comply. A sign that Melanie's list contained some growth potential for Stuart, however, was the fact that there were some requests that he found very difficult to do. For example, he thought it would be very hard for him to give up his own bedroom. "I really cherish my time alone," he said. "It would be difficult for me to give that up. I'm not willing to do that now." It came as no surprise to me that that was the thing Melanie wanted most. One partner's greatest desire is often matched by the other partner's greatest resistance. "I don't feel like we're really married unless we sleep in the same bed," she said. "I cried myself to sleep for a week after you moved into your own room. I really hate it." I reminded Melanie that letting her husband know how much she wanted him to share a bedroom with her was an important piece of information for him. But he was not obligated to cooperate. The only legitimate power she had in the relationship was to inform Stuart of her needs and to change her own behavior to meet Stuart's needs. Complex change set in motion. When we were through working with Melanie's list, Stuart volunteered to share his list. He, too, had identified a chronic complaint, isolated his desire, connected it with a childhood need, and composed a list of target activities. His main criticism of Melanie was that she was too judgmental. It seemed to him that she was always criticizing him. This was painful to him, he acknowledged, because he had judgmental parents. Which, he added with a smile and a sideways glance at me, given all the information I've gotten at this workshop, is probably one of the reasons I was attracted to her. One of Stuart's specific requests was that Melanie praise him once a day for the next 2 months. Melanie acknowledged that some days it would be hard for her to do that. "I don't think I'm being hypercritical," she said with sincerity. "I think the problem is that Stuart does a lot of irresponsible things. The basic problem is not my attitude. It's his behavior." The main reason it was going to be difficult for her to praise Stuart, I realized, was that she was denying the validity of her husband's complaint. She saw herself as a realistic judge of his character, not as a perpetual critic. Stuart had homed in on a disowned negative trait. One of the benefits of the behavior change request dialogue, however, is that Melanie didn't have to agree with Stuart's assessment of her in order for the healing process to work. All she had to do was comply with his simple request for 1 compliment a day. When she did this, she would become more aware of her husband's positive qualities, and eventually, she would learn how immersed she had been in the role of judge and critic. Ultimately, both Stuart and Melanie would gain from the exercise. Stuart would be able to bask in some of the approval that he deserved, and Melanie would be able to accept and transform a denied negative trait. In the process of healing her husband, she would be becoming a more whole and loving person herself. When couples faithfully perform this exercise for several months, they discover another hidden benefit of the exercise. The love that they are sending out to each other is touching and healing their own wounds. Wounds they didn't even know they had. Stuart and Melanie continued to work with me in private therapy sessions for over a year. About 6 months after the workshop, Stuart was finally able to overcome his resistance to sharing a bedroom with Melanie. He didn't like the idea, but he saw how important it was to her and decided to give it a 1-month trial. The first week, he had trouble sleeping and resented that he had agreed to the change. In his own bedroom, he had been free to open the window and get more fresh air whenever he wanted to, and turn on the light and read when he couldn't sleep. Now he felt trapped. By the second week, he was able to sleep, but he still felt as though he were compromising himself. By the third week, he found that there was some compensation to sharing a bed. First of all, Melanie was a lot happier. And second, they were having sex more often. It was much easier to make love when they didn't have to make appointments. By the last week of the experiment, he decided that he could live with the new arrangement. "I've gotten used to having her sleep beside me now," he admitted. "I guess I'm not the hermit I thought I was." Melanie and Stuart's relationship continued to improve. And during a session several months later, Melanie said that things had gotten so good between them that she no longer needed the reassurance of having Stuart sleep with her. "I know you love your own room," she said. "I'd rather have you stay with me, but I don't think I need it anymore." Through the behavior change request dialogue, he had been able to give her enough reassurance that he cared about her and valued her, so that she was able to let go of that particular request. But to her surprise, Stuart would have no part of it. "I'd be lonely in my own room," he said. "I wouldn't know what to do with myself." What was going on here? Somehow, in the act of responding to Melanie's need for more intimacy, Stuart was discovering a hidden need of his own. In the conversations I had with Stuart, I learned that his mother and father had not been comfortable with physical or verbal expressions of love. Stuart maintained that this didn't bother him. "I knew that they loved me," he said. "They just showed it in other ways." In other words, his way of adapting to their lack of affection was to decide that he didn't need any. "I remember visiting other kids' homes," he told me, "and their parents were more affectionate to me than my own. One woman would even hug and kiss me. I was really uncomfortable around her. I was much more used to my parents' style of parenting." When he and Melanie were first married, he was drawn to her because of her affectionate nature. But eventually, her need for intimacy seemed excessive to him, and he began to withdraw, just as he had pulled away from the adults who had been physically demonstrative to him when he was a child. But now, with more insight into the nature of his problems, and with the desire to be more intentional in his relationship, he had been able to overcome his resistance and respond to Melanie's needs. In the process, he had discovered his own repressed need for affection and was able to satisfy a hidden need of his own. I have witnessed this phenomenon of two-way healing so many times in my work with couples that I can now say with confidence that most husbands and wives have identical needs. But what is openly acknowledged in one is denied in the other. When the partners with a denied need are able to overcome their resistance and satisfy the other partner's overt need, a part of the unconscious mind interprets the caring behavior as self-directed. Love of the self is achieved through love of the other. To understand why the psyche works in this peculiar way, we need to recall our earlier discussion about the brain. The old brain doesn't know that the outside world exists. Instead, it responds to the symbols generated by the cerebral cortex. Lacking a direct connection to the external world, the old brain assumes that all behavior is inner-directed. When you are able to become more generous and loving to your spouse, therefore, your old brain assumes that this activity is intended for you. Rewards and resistance. To summarize, Melanie and Stuart reaped 3 important benefits from doing the behavior change request dialogue. 1. The partner who requested the change in behavior was able to resolve some childhood needs. 2. The partner who made the changes recovered aspects of the lost self. 3. The partner who made the changes satisfied repressed needs that were identical to the partner's. The result of all this growth was a dramatic increase in positive feelings between them. Both Melanie and Stuart felt better about themselves because they had been able to satisfy each other's fundamental needs. Meanwhile, they felt better about their partners because their partners were helping them satisfy their needs. This made them more willing to stretch beyond their resistance into more positive, nurturing behaviors. Through this simple process of defining their needs, understanding how they are connected with the past, and then converting them into small, positive requests, they had turned their relationship into a self-sustaining vehicle for personal growth. Resistance. This beneficial change always involves some resistance. One of Freud's insights was that underneath every wish is a fear of having that wish come true. When your partner starts treating you the way you long to be treated, you experience a strange combination of pleasure and fear. You like what your partner is doing, but a part of you feels that you don't deserve it. In fact, a part of you believes that in accepting the positive behavior, you are violating a powerful taboo. I touched on this common reaction before when I talked about the taboo against pleasure. But in the case of the behavior change request dialogue, your resistance will be even stronger. An example will help clarify the nature of this resistance. Let's suppose that you grew up with parents who were quick to point out your faults. Out of a misguided attempt to help you be more successful, they highlighted every one of your failings. They assumed that making your faults known to you would motivate you to correct them. All they managed to do, however, was erode your self-confidence. When you managed to triumph over their negative influence and act with a degree of self-assertion, you were told to stop being so cocky. You were stung by their reaction, but you were a young child and had little choice but to cooperate. Anything else was dangerous to your survival. Over time, you began to identify with their negative view of you. I am cocky. Outside of your awareness, these negative feelings toward yourself deepened into self-hatred. When you looked for a mate, you unwittingly chose someone who perpetuated your parents' critical nature. And once again, you were under attack. But this time, from both the inside and the outside. Let's suppose that for some reason, your partner begins to treat you more kindly. At first, you thrive on this turn of events. But gradually, an inner voice makes itself heard. You can't be respected, says the voice. That's not allowed. If you continue along this path, you will not survive. Your existence is in the hands of others, and they won't let you be whole. To silence this voice, you find ways to undermine your partner's behavior. Maybe you deliberately pick a fight or become suspicious of his or her motives. Ironically, you are looking for a way to deny yourself the very love and affirmation you so desperately want. Why do you do this? On an unconscious level, accepting love from your partner feels too dangerous because it contradicts a parent's view that you are unworthy of love. Going against a parent's edicts can trigger the fear of abandonment and death. To your old brain, it's far safer to turn away your partner's love than to trigger a parent's rage. The defense against receiving love is more common than most people would believe. The fear can range from an inability to accept compliments to an inability to form an intimate partnership. The way to overcome this fear is to keep on with the process. I urge my clients to continue using the behavior change request dialogue until their anxiety becomes more manageable. Given enough time, they learn that the taboos that have been impeding their growth are ghosts of the past and have no real power in their present-day lives. I was working with one man who was doing an excellent job of stretching into new behaviors. In response to his wife's requests to be more available to her and their children, he was slowly rearranging his priorities at work. He had stopped bringing work home on weekends and was managing to come home by 6 o'clock in the evening most days a week. But when his wife asked him to become a more active parent, he ran headlong into his resistance. He came into my office one day and exploded. "Harville, if I have to change one more thing, I'm going to cease to exist. I'm no longer going to be me. It's going to be the death of my personality." To change in the way that his partner wanted him to change meant that the me that he was familiar with had to go away. The rushed, successful executive was going to have to become more of a relaxed, nurturing parent. On an unconscious level, this change was equated with death. I assured him that if he were to continue to change his behavior, he would feel anxious from time to time, but he wasn't going to die. He was not going to disappear, because he was not his behaviors, his values, or his beliefs. He was much bigger than all those things combined. In fact, if he were to change some of his more limiting behaviors and his beliefs, he would become more fully the person he was, the whole, loving, spiritual being he had been as a child. He would be able to develop the tender, nurturing side of his personality, which had been shoved aside in his efforts to excel in the business world. His family would benefit, and at the same time, he would become a more complete human being. So that he could triumph over his fear of death, I advised him to keep on with the activities that stimulated his fear. "At first you'll think you're really going to die," I told him. "A voice from deep inside you is going to say, 'Stop, this is too much. I'm going to die. I'm going to die.' But if you continue to change, eventually your old brain will recycle, and the voice will quiet down. I'm going to die. I'm going to die. I'm going to die? But I'm not dying." Ultimately, the fear of death will no longer be an inhibiting factor in your campaign for self-growth. Agape. When the behavior change request dialogue is integrated into your relationship, the healing power of love relationships is not just an unconscious expectation. It is a daily fact of life. A love relationship can fulfill your hidden drive to be healed and whole and to be deeply connected with another human being. But it can't happen the way you want it to happen, easily, automatically, without defining what it is that you want, without asking, and without reciprocating. You have to moderate your old brain reactivity with a more intentional, conscious style of interaction. You have to stop expecting the outside world to take care of you and begin to accept responsibility for your own healing. And the way you do this, paradoxically, is by focusing your energy on healing your partner. It is when you direct your energy away from yourself and toward your partner that deep-level psychological and spiritual healing begins to take place. When making a request, rather than reacting, becomes your standard method for dealing with criticism and conflict, you will have reached a new stage in your journey toward a conscious partnership. You will have moved beyond the power struggle and beyond the stage of awakening into the stage of transformation. Your relationship will now be based on mutual caring and love. The kind of love that can best be described by the Greek word agape. Agape is a self-transcending love that redirects eros, the life force, away from yourself and toward your partner. As one transaction follows another, the pain of the past is slowly erased, and both of you will experience the reality of your essential wholeness. Chapter 11. Creating a Sacred Space. From Shirdi Sai Baba. Before you speak, ask yourself, is it necessary? Is it true? Does it improve on the silence? Throughout this book, I've been talking about the vital role that safety plays in creating lasting love. Two people cannot be passionate friends unless they feel safe in each other's company. Couples need to feel physically safe, to be sure, but they also need to feel emotionally safe. Without safety, they cannot say what's on their minds, express their full range of feelings, or be who they really are. They cannot lay down their armor and connect, even if they truly want to. People are built that way. Danger activates our defenses. During my early work, I designed 4 exercises, discussed in earlier chapters, to help couples create a climate of safety. To refresh your memory, the exercises are: 1. Closing down the exits that prevent intimacy. 2. Returning to the caring behaviors of romantic love. 3. Using the Imago dialogue to deepen understanding and compassion. And 4. Diffusing anger and frustration by transforming criticisms into respectful requests. These exercises help couples develop trust and goodwill and experience more joy in their daily lives. In addition to developing these basic exercises, Helen and I have also spent many years searching for ways to help couples manage their intense feelings of anger and rage, those outbursts that are typically fueled by childhood pain and disappointment. When people spew this archaic anger at their partners, the relationship can become a war zone. But when they repress their anger, they can also jeopardize the relationship. When people deny this critical part of their being, they dampen their enthusiasm for life and their capacity to love. To make the relationship a safe haven, couples need to find a way to manage their anger that brings them closer together and sustains a feeling of connection. My story. I know firsthand the destructive power of repressed feelings. I endured subclinical depression for the first 33 years of my life, and my emotional numbness was one of the main reasons for the failure of my first marriage. I was depressed because I was not in touch with my sorrow and anger over the death of my parents. When I look back, It is astonishing to me that I could lose both of my parents by the age of 6 and not experience any emotional pain. My father died when I was 18 months old, and I have no memory of that event. My mother died from a sudden stroke 5 years later. I am told that I showed little reaction. I didn't even cry. In fact, I remember my adult siblings taking me aside and praising me for being such a brave boy. Operating on naive childhood logic, I converted their compliment into a blanket assumption. I am loved when I deny my pain. I learned the lesson well. In young adulthood, I was able to look back on my early life and tell myself I was fortunate that both my parents had died. It gave me the opportunity to leave the farm and live in town with my sisters, where I got a better education. This myth had its uses. I went through my childhood numb to the pain of abandonment. I pictured myself as a lucky person, not a poor orphan boy, and I wasted little time bemoaning my fate. I took on challenges well beyond my years and succeeded at most of them. I was on my way. But decades later, my repressed sorrow wreaked havoc in my first marriage. Cut off from my pain, I was not fully alive. To survive, I had anesthetized an essential part of my being. Unconsciously, I looked to my wife for what I was missing. I hungered for emotional and physical contact, but she was unable to give me enough, partly because of deficiencies in her own childhood, and partly because she experienced me as withholding, cold, demanding, and needy. It was a vicious cycle. The more I wanted, the more she withheld. One of the most telling moments in our relationship took place the day after her father died. We were alone in our bedroom, and her grief over his death was just hitting her. She cried and cried. I circled my arms around her, but my body was stiff and unyielding. There was no warmth in my embrace. Inside, I felt deeply conflicted. Intellectually, I knew that it was reasonable for her to cry over her father's death, and I wanted to comfort her. But a larger part of me was cold and unsympathetic. That part was thinking, what's the problem? I lost both of my parents when I was a little boy, and I didn't cry. Why is she so emotional? Lessons learned early in life persist. A few years later, when I was 33, I saw a therapist for the first time, not because I thought I needed any help, but because personal therapy was a recommended part of my training. In one of the first sessions, the therapist asked me to tell him about my parents. I told him that they had both died when I was very young, but that a lot of good luck had come my way as a result. Because they both died, I got to live with my sisters, get out of South Georgia, get a better education, and so on. Tell me about your mother's death, he said to me, cutting short my highly edited autobiography. I started to tell him how she died, but for some reason my throat felt constricted. Tell me about her funeral, he said. Once again I tried to talk. Once again, my throat seized up. Then, to my great astonishment, I burst into tears. I began to sob. There was no stopping me. I was an adult man, and there I was, sobbing like a 6-year-old boy. After a few minutes, my therapist looked at me kindly and said, "Harville, you are just beginning to grieve over your mother's death." After that momentous day, I began to feel my own pain and anger, not just from the past, but from the present as well. I became less anxious. I had more compassion for other people. If my needs or wishes were disregarded, I experienced the normal feelings of sadness or anger, but not rage or depression. Because I was being reunited with my full range of feelings, I was beginning to feel fully alive. I was more in touch with who I was and where I had been, and I became open to the rhythm of my own heart. An exercise that failed. In the original edition of this book, published in 1988, I included an exercise to help couples release their repressed sorrow and anger. I called it the full container exercise. It was based on the psychodynamic model of psychology that views the self as a container that is filled with pent-up emotions. According to this school of thought, purging those emotions helps people relieve their anxiety and depression and go on to live more satisfying lives. I agreed with this theory, so I adapted a new technique for couples. First, I would ask them to sit down in chairs that faced each other. I designated one partner the sender and the other the receiver. Then I would ask the sender to identify a chronic frustration that was interfering with their relationship. You're always late. You don't really listen to me. You don't help with the housework. You're on my case all the time. You don't value what I have to say. Next, I asked the sender to think about how that frustration might be linked with painful childhood experiences. Once the connection was made, I encouraged the sender to express that frustration, amplifying the annoyance until it turned into outright anger. To protect the psyche of the receiver, I would ask him or her to create an imaginary shield to deflect the anger and to keep from feeling under attack. The anger is not just about you, I would advise the receiver. Its roots are deep in your partner's childhood. Once the catharsis was complete, I would help the couple deal with the original frustration by using the stretching exercise described in Chapter 10. Years ago, I viewed the full container exercise as one of the flagship techniques in imago therapy, but as time went on, I saw that it produced mixed results. The final portion of the exercise, the stretching exercise, always worked, but sometimes the emotional catharsis had the opposite effect of the one I intended. Couples would become more conflicted than they were before. Eventually, I discovered literature from other therapists that confirmed my experience. I stopped using the full container exercise in workshops and private sessions, and I have removed it from this revised edition of Getting the Love You Want. Having two people in a love relationship vent their anger at each other, even within the confines of a structured exercise and under the watchful eye of a therapist, could cause more harm than good. This was a clear example of reality not supporting the theory. Why anger breeds anger. What was wrong with the exercise? First of all, some partners on the receiving end of the anger still felt threatened by the outburst, no matter how much they tried to deflect the torrent. Their old brains couldn't comprehend that their partner's anger was part of a clinical exercise. When the receiving partners felt threatened, they had a hard time feeling empathic. They might mirror their partner's experience and mouth the right words. "I'm sorry you're in so much pain." But their primal instinct was to batten down the hatches or abandon ship. There was another, more puzzling problem with the exercise. After the exercise, the partner who had vented the anger could feel angrier than usual in coming days. The exercise that had been designed to release stored-up anger seemed equally capable of generating it. I began to understand why when Helen had started reading books about neuroscience. She was fascinated by this field, partly because it shed new light on relationship dynamics. She learned that the adult brain is far more adaptable than we first thought. I was intrigued and began reading the literature myself. I discovered that scientists have known for decades that a young person's brain is greatly influenced by experience. If nerve connections are not stimulated, they are pruned away. When a child has new experiences, however, new pathways are formed. This plasticity gives the child a highly efficient, adaptable brain, ready for all that life has to offer. Once upon a time, scientists believed that the adult brain was hardwired, thus immune to experience. The only way the brain changed beyond adolescence, according to early thinking, was to lose neurons with advancing age. This bleak view of the adult brain has now been revised, thanks to sophisticated imaging devices that can show physical changes in brain activity. These images have made it very clear that what adults do, think, and even feel alters the physical structure of their brains. Although the adult brain is not as adaptable as a child's brain, it remains a highly responsive organ. A number of studies have shown that the more time adults engage in a particular activity, the more nerve cells are marshaled to the task. The brain acts like a military commander, summoning new troops as they are needed. In one such study, Harvard medical researchers instructed a group of volunteers to practice a simple piano exercise for 2 hours a day for a week. After each practice session, the neuroscientists took images of the volunteers' brains so they could measure the size of the area devoted to finger activity. By the 5th day, they observed a significant increase in the size and activity of that area. Apparently, one of the reasons that practice makes perfect is that repeating an activity commandeers more neurons to the job. Remarkably, researchers discovered that the same brain expansion takes place when people merely imagine doing a specific activity. As an extension of the piano experiment, the Harvard team asked another group of volunteers to imagine that they were playing a simple piece of music. They had no pianos in front of them. In fact, they were asked to keep their hands and fingers perfectly still. When the volunteers were scanned at the end of a week, the scientists were amazed to see that the virtual piano players had the same expanded neural pathways as the people who actually played the piano. They had discovered that mental training and imagery can literally rewire the brain. For the purposes of my work with couples, I was keenly interested in the fact that changing your thoughts can change your brain. In a type of therapy called behavior change therapy, or BCT, people are trained in how to use their rational minds to challenge the thoughts and beliefs that can trigger depression. As an example, a person might generate this irrational train of thought. I've made a number of calls to family and friends, and only one person has called back. Nobody loves me anymore. Taken to its illogical extreme, it becomes, because no one loves me, I'm going to be abandoned and die. The emotional part of the brain reacts to this depressing thought as though it were real, and the person feels rejected, lonely, and scared. When people see the absurdity of this type of catastrophic thinking, they can begin to think more rationally. So people are not returning my calls. That doesn't mean they don't love me. They may be busy or out of town. Avoiding the doomsday thinking can prevent the depressive feelings. Research now shows that BCT can relieve depression just as well as antidepressant medications. Brain scans help explain why. When people use their rational minds to defeat depression, the part of the brain that is linked with rumination and obsessive thinking calms down. On a computerized image, that area appears darker, indicating that less oxygen is being consumed. This calm state extends beyond the mental exercise. People trained in BCT can go through life with a less reactive brain, no longer triggering depressive or anxious thoughts. Once again, thinking alone has been shown to alter the physiology of the brain. Mind over gray matter. The holding exercise. Taken together, these new findings about the changeable adult brain, combined with my own observations about couples and similar observations of other imagotherapists, have changed imagotherapy. First of all, my colleagues and I no longer encourage couples to direct their archaic rage at each other. The new research shows that dwelling on anger has the potential to enhance the anger, not diffuse it. I used to think that venting anger was like blowing the foam off a glass of beer. A few puffs and you're done with it. Instead, it's like blowing on a fire. The more you blow, the hotter the flame. On a physiological level, Expressing anger on a regular basis enlarges the part of the brain devoted to negative emotions. What you do is what you get. With so much cerebral real estate devoted to anger, an angry response can become a conditioned response. Another fact about the brain is that the unconscious mind experiences all anger as dangerous to the self. It cannot determine whether the anger is directed at itself or at someone else. Indeed, new studies in the neurosciences of a phenomenon called mirror neurons tell us that in face-to-face situations, when neurons fire in someone else's brain, identical neurons fire in our own brain. When others are angry, we become angry. In other words, what you see is what you feel. So now, we encourage couples to share emotions other than anger that they experienced in childhood, such as grief, fear, and sadness. These less volatile emotions underlie the anger, and we have found that expressing them to a receptive partner helps relieve the hostility without reinforcing it. When couples share their childhood wounds with one another, they deepen their understanding of each other's past. They also experience renewed empathy for each other's suffering. Ultimately, they begin to see one another as wounded people, not bad people. Through this more accurate lens, they can see that most of their conflicts originate from childhood pain, not from any present-day malicious intentions. One of the exercises we use to facilitate the sharing of childhood experiences is called the holding exercise. Unlike the full container exercise, this one helps relieve repressed feelings without generating more negative emotions. I got the idea for the specific form of the exercise while going for a walk. I found myself looking into the window of a bookstore, a habit of mine. And in the window, I saw a parenting book with the word holding in the title. The cover drawing showed a woman holding a child on her lap with the child's face on the left side of her chest, over her heart. Many mothers instinctively hold their babies in this position. It appears to be a great source of comfort for infants, perhaps because hearing the mother's heart and being held close to her body is reminiscent of being inside the womb. As I studied the drawing, I began to imagine couples holding each other in this fashion and talking about early childhood experiences. My gut feeling was that this primal holding position would elicit a flood of emotions. When I went home to share this idea with Helen, she reminded me of her earlier work with a model of therapy in which the therapist holds and comforts a client, essentially reparenting them. Using her insights, we developed a similar holding exercise. But instead of having the therapist hold the client, we asked the partners to hold each other so that the bonding experience would take place between the partners rather than with us. We asked one partner to sit in a comfortable position and hold the other partner with his or her head across the heart. From this position, they would recount painful childhood experiences, while the holding partner gently and warmly mirrored their comments. We decided to experiment with the holding exercise at the next couples workshop. An older couple, John and Vivian, volunteered to be the first guinea pigs. I instructed John to sit against a wall and then hold Vivian in his arms as though she was a young child, and I positioned her head next to his heart. Next, I asked John to ask his partner to recall memories from her childhood. To facilitate the flow of memories, I suggested that he make encouraging sounds and mirror back to her what she was saying. When she was through expressing a thought or feeling, he might ask, "Is there more?" After momentary embarrassment, John and Vivian began to follow my instructions. Vivian spoke in a very quiet voice, keeping most of what she had to say between the two of them. John bent over her, listening intently. Their murmured expressions went on for several minutes. Then, suddenly, Vivian began to sob. John held her more tightly and began to rock her. Tears filled his eyes as well. The experience was very powerful for the couple. John's compassion for Vivian's pain was evident to everyone in the room. Later in the session, I had them switch roles, with Vivian holding her partner, and John able to experience what it was like to feel safe and nurtured as he told his own story. When the two of them talked about their experience in front of the group, they said they had learned a lot about each other's inner worlds and felt deep empathy for one another. Like many couples, they discovered that they had endured many of the same insults in childhood, but had adapted to them in different ways. The unconscious agenda that each had brought into the marriage was beginning to be revealed, and their wounds were healing in the process. When couples take part in the holding exercise, they get the response they have been longing for all their lives. Their old brains perceive their partners as surrogate parents. Only this time around, those parents have become attuned parents, accepting, nurturing, calm, attentive, and non-judgmental. Pain from the past can be healed in the present when you receive attention and empathy from a loving partner. Removing all negativity. Once we removed the full container exercise from imago therapy and added the holding exercise, couples began to make more rapid progress. Their conflicts became more subdued, and their mutual admiration grew. But there was yet more ground to gain. We discovered that couples had an even more joyful relationship when they abolished all forms of negativity. This involved getting rid of blatant forms, such as anger, shame, and criticism, but also eliminating more subtle forms as well, including such well-known ploys as helpful criticism, inattention, condescension, the silent treatment, and using a bored or weary tone of voice. Ideally, this ban would extend all the way to eliminating even negative thoughts, because we all have internal radar that makes us astute at picking up nonverbal cues from our partners. We can detect the subtle changes in posture and expression that accompany their negative thoughts, which means that a complete transformation cannot be made until that aspect of negativity is addressed. Keep in mind that the goal is not to repress the feelings behind our negative thoughts and behaviors. That would only add to our store of pent-up emotions, but rather to bring them out into the open and see them for what they really are, a warning sign that some aspect of the relationship needs work. And as you have learned in earlier chapters, the best way to start solving a relationship problem is to look at your own contribution. Here I am, having critical thoughts about my partner again. What does this say about me? What am I doing or not doing right now that is feeding my negative attitude? The task may seem daunting, but the rewards are great. As negativity recedes, goodwill rushes in to fill the void. Without conscious effort, you find yourself focusing on your partner's admirable qualities, much as you did during courtship. Only this time, you will have the insights and tools you need to sustain your regard. Meanwhile, your partner will also be seeing you in a much more positive light, and you will both thrive in its warm glow. Eventually, a sacred space will well up between you, one that both of you want to nurture and protect. With conflict removed, connection will deepen, and passion will flow. What is negativity? I want to stop for a moment and clarify what I mean by negativity. Negativity is any thought, word, or deed that tells your partner, you're not okay when you think what you think or act the way that you act. In essence, you are rejecting your partner's otherness. We sometimes feel the need to negate our partners when they do or say something that makes us uncomfortable. Usually, they are just being themselves. But from our point of view, they are threatening an image that we have of them. or they are failing to meet an unspoken need of our own. Typically, negativity makes its first appearance in a love relationship as denial. I can't believe you did that. You never said anything like that before. You can't really mean that. You're not that kind of person. The fact that your partner is a separate individual with wishes and needs different from yours is starting to dawn on you, and you feel threatened. Your denial is a desperate ploy to hold on to your illusions. Say it ain't so. When your partner continues to depart from your projected image, the tendency is to bring out the big guns, one by one. Your arsenal includes shame, blame, criticism, invasiveness, avoidance, and finally, blanket condemnation. First, you shame. How do you think that feels? You ought to be ashamed by the way you treated my friend. In essence, you're trying to make your partner feel guilty for being who he or she is. Then you blame. You were late, and that made me really upset. That's why I haven't been talking to you. If you hadn't been so angry, we would have been able to settle the matter in very little time. When you blame, you put all the burden of your frustrations on your partner. Next, you begin to criticize your partner's character traits. You are so insensitive. You are untrustworthy. In addition to their unacceptable behaviors, you always think about yourself first. You are attempting to paint your partner not only as the source of all your frustration, but to make them into a bad person as well. A more subtle ploy is to invade your partner's psyche and act as if you had X-ray vision. That is not what you really think. The reason you're so crabby is that you're obsessing too much about work. If you'll just listen to me, I'll tell you what you need to do. The final weapon is absolutism. You never listen to me. You always leave the hard work for me. That's just the way you are. Every time I make a simple suggestion, you have a big fit. It's no wonder that our partners feel depressed, stay late at work, drink too much, don't want to make love, or stay up late by themselves. Being with us is not a safe place to be. They experience being chopped up into little pieces, dissected, and rejected. This is a form of emotional annihilation. At the base level, it expresses contempt. No one can be healed or grow in such a toxic environment. To get the love we want, we need to eliminate negativity in all its forms. There's another good reason to stop negativity. The negativity that we express toward our partners comes back like a boomerang and affects us as well. That's because the old brain does not know whether the negativity is being directed outwards or inwards. This theory has been backed up by studies showing that when one person yells at another, the person being yelled at produces more of the stress hormone cortisol. That's to be expected. But perhaps more interestingly, the same increase in cortisol is seen in the angry person as well. One could say that any negativity that we direct toward others is a form of self-abuse. Cold turkey. Removing all negativity from our love relationship was the final turning point for Helen and me. When we succeeded, we finally achieved the relationship we had wanted all of our adult lives, one that was safe, intimate, and passionate. For us, eliminating negativity was a two-stage process. The first stage was a gradual working through of the power struggle. One would think that two therapists would be able to avoid the power struggle altogether, but this was not so. Like many readers of this book, Helen and I had difficult childhoods. We are also intense, highly motivated people, each burdened with a heavy dose of perfectionism. On top of that, we have strong opinions about nearly everything, and we both tend to think that we are right. It took us a long time to realize that each of us could be right all the time, or we could be in a relationship. During the worst of times, our conflicts were on a par with many of the couples I counseled. Over a period of many years, we overcame most of our problems by using the exercises in this book. We practiced the Imago dialogue and used it with some success within our own relationship and with our children. We still marvel at its power to diffuse conflict and forge understanding. We became more thoughtful lovers and made frequent expressions of love and gratitude through words, notes, gifts, and thoughtful gestures. Over time, we learned how to work together harmoniously as business partners. There were moments when we felt deep love and empathy for each other, but it was not enough. We still felt a lingering tension lurking in the relationship. The underlying problem we eventually discovered is that we were allowing negativity to rupture the connection between us. It didn't take much. A critical comment, impatience, a raised tone of voice. Sometimes we would degenerate into loud arguments. Whenever we descended into negativity, our pain was acute. Negativity never got us what we wanted. It always made matters worse. When we cooled off, we realized that it would take us hours or even days of repair work to feel connected again. Eventually, it became clear as day that being negative with each other was irrational, abusive, and counterproductive. We agreed that the only solution was to eliminate all forms of negativity once and for all. We decided to go cold turkey. To enforce our decision, we instituted a rule. Whoever initiated a negative comment or behavior would have to counter it with 3 positive statements about the other person. I appreciate the fact that you were an attentive listener to me last night, even though you were very tired. You gave me such great feedback on the letter I was writing to the board members. I loved it when you took the time to go for a walk with me, even though you were busy. Each positive statement had to be unique and specific, and we couldn't repeat anything we had said before. A hidden benefit of this rule was that we discovered many wonderful things about each other that we had been overlooking when we were upset. Our statements of appreciation increased the flow of love between us. Every time Helen told me something she genuinely admired about me, I was deeply moved, each and every time. She had the same response when I praised her. Our admiration gradually evolved into a state of chronic adoration. Finally, we were giving each other the respect we both wanted on a continual basis. What's more, we found it easier and easier to do. Our relationship had become such a sacred place for us that we had no desire to violate it. To slip back into old behaviors became unthinkable. Helen and I felt so blessed by what we had achieved that we held 2 recommitment ceremonies, the first of which was at our annual conference with our colleagues in the Imago community. We wrote new vows of commitment that were in keeping with all we had learned and recited them before the group. Afterwards, our colleagues lifted us high in the air and paraded us around the room while everyone sang and danced. 2 months later, we held a New Year's Eve ceremony in the majestic Riverside Church in New York City, where we are members. Our pastor led us through our vows in front of 250 family members and friends, after which we retired to a grand hall on the Hudson River, where we ate and danced and were roasted and toasted until midnight. When the fireworks exploded, we felt like they were just for us. We included all the celebrants of the new year as witnesses to our love and our future.